Hi there, friend. My name is John Werner. I used to be a part of the largest cult in the United States. After studying the Bible, Christian history, and ministry, I set my sights on confronting the problematic nature of white evangelicalism in the United States. In 2019, I published my first book as a first step in addressing the subtle issues of this complex system. This podcast will continue that work under the same title. Welcome to The Cult of Christianity. Do not listen to this episode first. I like to organize my episodes in such a way that anyone could listen to any episode in any order just based on the topic they are interested in. But in this case, I beg of you, do not let this episode be your first one, because you need to get to know me outside of this episode first. If you only listen to this one, you might fixate on these different ideas as central to my identity or personality. They are not. But spirituality is an important thing to talk about if you're going to talk about cults and or Christianity. Because spirituality, whatever the hell the word means, and whether it truly exists or not, it influences people and often directly affects their biggest life decisions and core personality traits. But I don't want to speak too impersonally about this, because whether you've been a die-hard cultist of John Werner fan or just listened to me be interviewed once or twice, you'll probably notice that I have said some weird, sometimes conflicting, and certainly not atheistic things about my own spirituality. I've most recently co-opted Tia Leving's term, spiritually private. I've also said I'm skeptically spiritual. I've said I believe there's something rather than nothing, but I've never really elaborated on that, and I don't want to elaborate. I still don't want to elaborate because if I do have a core religious belief, a creed of spirituality, it is the paradoxical, simplistic, and one could argue ultimately meaningless creed that, whether I like it or not, it's something I believe, and the thing I believe is that the second you put words to your spirituality, you ruin it. And it's a great line for dodging interview questions, but it's not meant as a thought-stopping cliche. I sincerely feel that when you try to describe something otherworldly, something mystical, something that is beyond the material, with sounds that symbolize meaning, language, and definitions, it completely obscures the value. So let me now say a couple thousand words about spirituality. The first and most important point, aside from me explaining that this is indeed a fruitless exercise, is to emphasize that more than any other episode I've done, this will be conjecture. This will be opinion, this will be bias, this will be baseless. I might mention some other people's words like consciousness, or borrow from some Eastern religions or New Age wokeism. I might even talk about a historical era or two. But this is not going to be grounded. This isn't a deeper reality. This isn't important to living a happy, healthy, and moral life. These are merely musings of what may or may not exist beyond the five senses. And while Christian and non-Christian cult leaders often use such musings to exploit you for either your money or your soul, I'm saying the things I'm saying to encourage you that you can own your own spirituality, just as I own mine. And there isn't a collective agreement to arrive at here. I don't need or want you to respect any views that I'm about to express. Feel free to deconstruct them, make fun of them even. I believe in my heart of hearts that talks of spirituality are layered in problematic worldviews, especially here in the West. But be encouraged that you can escape a cult And you don't have to become an atheistic materialist in order to be right or good. You don't have to reject the template of Jesus, even if his story is more legend than historical. You don't even really have to become disinterested in immaterial musings just because you're done with coercive control and hierarchical religion. But most importantly, you absolutely never have to believe anything. You are an autonomous creature worthy of freedom to explore your imagination and what you choose to borrow and steal from other belief systems, or even nonsensical rants. It's entirely up to you. In fact, a wholesale commitment to any amount of certainty is unwise at minimum. This should be about you being in touch with your own thoughts and feelings, and as much as I dislike being vulnerable in this kind of format, with this kind of stuff, I am choosing to show you how I interact with my own thoughts and feelings about spirituality. So here we go. I've disclaimed enough. Humans always want more. We are never satiated. Even at our most content and most comfortable, we want more. Not in a capitalistic way where we just want to obtain more and more, and not even in a negative way where we are selfishly hoarding resources at every opportunity, though here in the United States, we are certainly more prone to that culturally than others. What I mean is that we always want to arrive. We want to belong. We want to feel connected. We want to be swimming in truth and correctness and avoid any pits of despair, loneliness, or cluelessness. Why? Well, C.S. Lewis used this as an argument for Christian morality. If memory serves, I believe in Mere Christianity, he used an analogy of saving a drowning man. Because there's at least two instincts there. One is to keep ourselves from drowning, and the other is to keep someone else from drowning. And what is the thing that makes us choose between saving the drowning man or not? What is that third thing that chooses between our instincts? Well, there's a lot of angles that you could take there. And let me just say, Christianity is the least compelling one, because they're going to flip-flop between whether that third thing is morality, God, or some other concept that fits on their grid. The rationalists have some better answers about the evolutionary drive to keep our species intact and sacrifice our own safety for the benefit of the whole. You could also make arguments based on values, which are complicated constructs. Do I value being a hero and saving someone else over my own life? Is it more about the legend than the moment? And perhaps our hierarchy of instincts is based on values. Perhaps it's completely random and chaotic. There are so many Venn diagrams of butterfly effects that finding reasons or meanings that sometimes we do things that seem better than others, and for whatever reason, our species tends to self-sacrifice for a greater good of sorts. But whether we do that because it's evolution, whether we do that because there's something spiritual going on, I personally have never been able to shake the idea that the greater good is something that isn't merely human. Now, it's not exactly fair because I've been programmed to think that way. For over 20 years, I was indoctrinated to assume things were spiritual, whether they were or not. I have neuropaths that predispose me to being inclined to listen for something more than earthly happenstances. I was told to see patterns and love and grace and mercy where there was none. But knowing all this doesn't make me less convinced that there's got to be more. When I was a Christian, a lot of what convinced me there must be more was based in fear and disgust with our world. And I still have a lot of those same fears, but I have a lot less disgust. Because as a Christian, I saw the world as fallen, broken, hurtful, and only offering momentary glimpses of something better. And I want to be clear, I still don't deny that there are flaws when it comes to living life. I'm a staunch realist in the sense that I don't think a beautiful sunset offsets tragedies of cancer, rape, and murder. I think often indulging privileges or being blissfully ignorant is how most people convince themselves that they are happy in the face of the actual hell that can be existence. But that sunset is still beautiful. Why is it still beautiful? This goes back to the inarticulate nature of what spirituality must be, at least in my opinion, because beauty beyond words, feelings beyond category, thoughts that can feel new when they are old. There's something there. And this will sound preachy, but y'all should be used to that by now. The other day, I was having a beer with my cousin. It sounds like a sermon, right? We both love baseball, and we were talking about the good old days of the Dusty Diamonds of our youth. And my cousin once made a triple play, and for all those unfamiliar, it's a very rare defensive play in baseball. And he talked about seeing the play just before it happened. And for others who have played sports, this doesn't sound crazy. Multiple times in different sports, I remember the experience of seeing the thing before it happens. And many people call this manifesting, visualizing, etc. The fascinating thing to me is that sometimes you visualize something in sports and it doesn't happen. And after all, you're always trying to win, and you don't always win, not even if you're a great like Michael Jordan, Simone Biles, or Shohei Ohtani. But when you do visualize it, and it does happen, it's not just close enough to how you imagined. There's so many times where it is verbatim. And that is weird. It's also weird how time feels slower when undergoing certain kinds of trauma, or how it feels like you leave your body in a car accident and then return. And like the time I was shot at, or frankly, every car wreck I've been in, or even more gross trauma that I'd rather not talk about publicly, time seems too slow. And the pace of time changes in a way that isn't merely perspective. Or maybe it is. I mean, that's the issue with talking about stuff like this. It's not that there aren't psychological or even scientific explanations for many of the weird phenomena that feel spiritual. The question is whether or not those explanations are good enough, and good enough in the sense that they truly do explain it, and good enough in the sense that we want to accept that there may be nothing more to this existence than some chemical and biological actions and reactions. But humans always want more. We seem to aim for truth, but never get there. And in the dim recesses of the Paleolithic period, a time when the world was vast and human spirit was just awakening to its place within it, you can picture our ancestors huddled around fires and caves, their wide eyes with the marvel and terror of the natural world around them. It was here in the flickering shadows that the seeds of spirituality took root. Early humans practiced this thing called animism, which is the belief that all things, animals, plants, rocks, rivers, held a spirit. This was not a world of dead matter, but a living force, vibrant with unseen energy and beings. And evidence of these beliefs come to us through the silent testimony of cave paintings. These images with their haunting depictions of animals and hunting scenes were not mere art, but acts of communion and communication with the perceived spirit world. The shamans, intermediaries between the seen and the unseen, conducted rituals and sought to harmonize human life with these spiritual forces. They were the first to dance between the realms, their painted bodies in rhythmic chants, invoking the presence of spirits. And as the last ice age retreated, humans entered the Neolithic period, marked by the dawn of agriculture. And this profound shift from nomadic to settled life really transformed human society and human spirituality. With the establishment of more permanent tribes came the construction of megalithic structures, such as infamously Stonehenge in England. And these stone circles and earthworks were not mere monuments, but sacred spaces designed for rituals that tied primarily the fertility of crops and livestock to the cycles of the heavens. And the fertility of the earth became central to spiritual life, giving rise to goddess worship and fertility rites. The earth was seen as a nurturing mother, hence we say Mother Earth, and the success of crops and herds was attributed to her favor. These early agricultural societies honored their deities with offerings and ceremonies seeking to ensure the continued abundance and harmony of their world. And as more ancient civilizations rose, it was accompanied by the rise of more diverse spirituality, which became increasingly complex and organized. In the land between the rivers, Mesopotamia, the Sumerians developed one of the earliest known polytheistic religions. Their gods were numerous, each embodying natural forces and human endeavors. The towering ziggurats served as earth abodes for those deities, where priests performed rituals to secure divine favor. In ancient Egypt, spirituality was inextricably linked with the concept of divine kingship. Pharaohs were not just rulers, but gods on earth, and intermediaries between the divine and the mortal. The grandeur of the pyramids and the intricate rituals surrounding death and the afterlife underscore that the Egyptians had a profound belief in the journey of the soul. Hieroglyphics and tomb artifacts depict a cosmos teeming with gods, spirits, and the promise of an eternal life. Simultaneously, on the Indian subcontinent, the Indus Valley civilization was cultivating its own spiritual traditions. Though much about their beliefs remains shrouded in mystery due to many undeciphered scripts, artifacts do suggest that there were some early forms of Hindu practices, whether it be ritual baths and fertility symbols. It all indicates a culture deeply engaged with the sacredness of water and life. And then if you look eastward, you find ancient China, where spirituality revolved around ancestry, specifically ancestor worship, and the early inklings of Taoism and Confucianism. The Chinese believe that their ancestors continued to influence the living world, necessitating offerings to honor them. Oracle bones inscribed with early Chinese characters, it reveals that they were a society deeply concerned with the divination and will of different spirits. And of course, there's ancient Greece, which had so many gods and goddesses, each one embodying different aspects of life and nature, and their stories are immortalized in myths that explained the world, but also explained human behavior. Greek spirituality was not confined to temples. It permeated every facet of life, from the hearth to the battlefield. And meanwhile, philosophers like Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, they began to explore metaphysical questions, laying the groundwork for a more rational and speculative approach to spirituality. But then there's this small corner of the ancient world, a revolutionary idea taking shape, the belief in a single, all-powerful deity, the monotheistic vision of some ancient Israelites that would later crystallize into Judaism. The Hebrew Bible chronicles the journey of these people and their covenant with Yahweh, a God who demanded exclusive worship and ethical conduct. And then obviously, you have the first century where there's the birth of this small thing called Christianity, a faith that grew out of Judaism and quickly spread across the Roman Empire. And obviously central to that was Jesus, but the conversion of Emperor Constantine in the 4th century marked a turning point, transforming Christianity into from an obscure sect to a dominant religion. Fast forwarding to the 7th century, another transformation happened, which was Islam. Founded by the Prophet Muhammad, Islam quickly spread, uniting a vast region under the banner of a single God, Allah. And then the Quran, believed to be the literal word of God, was revealed to Muhammad, and that documents his sayings and actions, and it forms the bedrock of the Islamic faith and practice. You got Hindu and Buddhism that continued to evolve over all these hundreds of years and had a rich variety of gods, rituals, philosophies. And it was all very, very spiritual. Buddhism offering a path to enlightenment through the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. And from its origin in India, Buddhism spread across Asia, adapting to and influencing the cultures it encountered. Fast forwarding again, you have the Reformation, where you have Martin Luther's challenges to the Catholic Church's authority. And it sparks different Protestant denominations seeking to return what they saw as the true teachings of Christianity. And then you have the Counter-Reformation, which was spearheaded by the Catholic Church, that aimed to reform internal practices and reaffirm core doctrines. But all of this led to more individualization. And then, of course, you fast forward some more and you get to the Scientific Revolution, you get to the Enlightenment. There's more questions. People are emphasizing reason and empirical evidence, and they don't like the unquestioned authority of religious institutions anymore. They want multiple spiritual perspectives. But one of the biggest ones to use was hardly spiritual at all, which was deism, which advocated for a rational belief in a creator who set the universe in motion but does not intervene in human affairs. And that laid the intellectual groundwork for our very complex relationship as humans between spirituality and science. And in more recent years, there's been so many New Age spiritualities, and in our current century, the globalization has brought this crazy amount of religious traditions and all this information about different spiritualities, and you have an increased interest in interfaith dialogue to foster understanding and cooperation and recognizing those common threads. But more than anything, the digital age has transformed the landscape of spirituality, with online platforms enabling the sharing and creation of spiritual content across the globe. And along with it, the explosion of spiritual gurus and grifters on a scale we've never seen before. The uncertainties and limitations inherent in our understanding of ancient spirituality is important to understand. Much of what we know comes from archaeological evidence, which is a process of interpretation and can be interpreted in various ways. Textual sources are often incomplete or biased, or just reflects the perspectives of those who created them and no one else. Oral traditions, which played a significant role in many cultures, are just lost or at least edited over time. Not to even mention the amount of misinformation that circulates online nowadays about all of these things. And the lack of written records from many early societies makes it challenging to ascertain what their spiritualities were and how certain they were of them. Our interpretations are shaped by the cultural biases of the historians and archaeologists who uncover and analyze these ancient worlds. Each new discovery can shift our understanding and reveal a rather fluid and dynamic nature of human spirituality. But as we stand at the cusp of the future, looking back on the vast panorama of human spirituality, we see a story of endless quest. From the animistic beliefs of our ancestors to the digital age's spiritual pluralism, humanity's search for meaning and connection with the divine has been constant. Now, Christians, in light of this, like to say some wild things about spirituality. Whether they are arrogantly proclaiming that all these spiritual beliefs, whether they were before or after their religion was created, it points to their religion, or so they claim. They think that people are close to obtaining the truth in Jesus if they engage with spiritual concepts, but they are missing the mark if they are not Christian. And the implication there means that those people who are spiritual but not Christian are simply not good enough. But Christians ignore how arrogant and deeply hypocritical and downright pathological it is to assume that other spiritual beliefs are mere shadows of the truth that they get to gatekeep. But Christians can also project a lot of fear of other spiritualities, and whether it's, wild accusations and disinformation about what other groups and individuals actually believe, or calling out where other cults abuse their flock, ignoring that they do the same thing to a more horrifying degree than anyone. What's even stranger to me is their uncomfortability with their own spirituality. because Christianity often portrays self-value as sinful. According to this dogma, any good action is attributed to God, and any failing is your fault. And that kind of framework discourages self-worth and promotes a mindset where humans are mere vessels for divine will, inherently worthless without divine intervention. And those teachings foster a profound sense of insecurity among believers as they are taught to distrust their own judgment. The constant message that humans are intrinsically sinful and incapable of good without God erodes self-esteem and self-trust, and it ensures that there is a dependence on church authority. And that leads them to view outsiders with suspicion, depicting non-believers as corrupt influences. This divide and conquer approach maintains the church's power by isolating believers from differing viewpoints. By instilling fear of external influence, church leaders reinforce the idea that the world outside the faith is dangerous and morally inferior. The mistrust of others is a clear indicator of spiritual insecurity. It reflects a belief that faith is fragile and so easily undermined by outside perspectives. That emphasis on separating from non-believers highlights an underlying fear that alternative viewpoints might actually be true and could destabilize a true believer. The cult leaders of Christianity reject uncertainty and prescribe rigid practices like prayer, scripture reading, and church attendance to maintain control. This insistence on a singular interpretation of God's will suggests deep insecurity within their faith. If believers truly trusted in an omnipotent, benevolent deity, there would be no need for such stringent control and fear of deviation. The church's reluctance to embrace uncertainty and its need to dictate every aspect of faith, it reflects a lack of confidence, both in the divine and the believer. And it gets confusing because modern evangelical rhetoric does sometimes seem hyper-individualized, but the truth is, it is not very individualized. The spirituality of the individual is the last thing they want to be diverse. Take the concept of spiritual gifts within evangelical circles, because it appears on the surface to celebrate diversity among the believers in their spirituality. These gifts ranging from teaching to prophecy, healing to speaking in tongues in some sects. It's a rich tapestry of divine abilities that must be bestowed upon the faithful by God. But each believer supposedly plays a unique role within the body of Christ and contributes their distinct spiritual strengths for the collective good. However, this ostensible celebration of diversity is tightly controlled by the church. The interpretation and application of these gifts are subjected to strict guidelines. Any deviation from the prescribed understanding is met with skepticism or outright rejection. The parameters set by the church leaders ensure that these gifts are used in ways that reinforce established doctrines and hierarchies rather than challenge or expand them. For instance, the gift of prophecy is often limited to reiterating existing theological positions rather than offering new insights. Teaching must align with doctrinal orthodoxy, and healing is framed within a context that underscores the church's power. Speaking in tongues, a practice that could be deeply personal and spontaneous, is regulated to fit within structured worship services, and some churches reject it altogether. This controlled environment stifles genuine spiritual expression and maintains a veneer of diversity while ensuring conformity. And the insistence on uniformity in the exercise of spiritual gifts is proof that there is a deep-seated insecurity within evangelical spirituality. If the faith was robust and confident, it could accommodate a broader spectrum of spiritual experiences. Instead, the tight control over spiritual gifts and other facets of believers' life shows that they have a deep fear of the unknown and a reluctance to accept the full range of potential human-divine interaction. This fear manifests in the rigid structures that govern spiritual practice, and it ultimately highlights a lack of trust in both God and the believer. and anyone's spiritual journey. When church leaders dictate how spirituality should be understood, they ensure that any expression of spirituality supports the existing power dynamics. It creates a dependency on the church for validation and guidance, and it undermines the believer's direct relationship with the divine. And sorry to beat a dead gripe, but I just want to explain that Christians not only don't have a monopoly on spirituality, it might not be that extreme to say they don't have spirituality at all, because they have a fundamental misunderstanding of what spirituality is. They can't embrace mystery, only hand wave criticism. They also don't get that there is no ethical way to systemize people's imagination. And that is exactly where, if I had my way, we would always keep the conversations about spirituality. Spirituality is an act of imagination, a reaching out with the mind to grasp the unseen and the unknown. It's the soul's way of making sense of the chaos, finding meaning in the vast expanse of our existence. The spirituality of a person can be a source of immense comfort and joy, a balm for the weary heart. But let's not be blind to its boundaries. When we allow our spiritual quests to overshadow the tangible world, to eclipse our responsibilities and the people around us, we walk a dangerous path. Spirituality, if unchecked, leads us away from reality into a realm where dysfunction reigns. To explore spirituality is to dance on the edge of the divine, to flirt with the infinite. It should be a safe haven, a source of solace and delight, but never a consuming fire. We've got to keep our feet on the ground even as we reach for the stars, ensuring that our spiritual pursuits enhance our lives rather than consume them. And it's in that balance that you can find true essence of meaningful spiritual enlightenment. And some spiritualists have pitched ideas of balance well, especially throughout history, some not so much. But however you measure whether a spirituality is good or bad is really up to you. But the more structured, the more systematic, and the more severe a spirituality seems, the less it sounds like spirituality at all to me. So why am I persistent in holding on to some vague spirituality instead of rejecting it wholesale? Why bother saying anything at all? Why am I adamant that I'm not an atheist, and I occasionally will say I think there is something rather than nothing? Well, one of my instincts in answering those questions is to say none of your business. But I owe you a bit more than that for your time listening through these ramblings. So here we go. The spiritual belief I hold, the time spent thinking of immaterial things, and the grip that the greater good has on me. The idea of good encapsulates my brain, and it's all in service to being a more empathetic person. When I see souls, whether they are there or not, I see the eternality of the deeper thing inside all of us. I see the opportunities for redemption arcs that aren't mere behavior changes. When I navigate conflict and the pain of hard things, the stress of relationships on all levels, the significance of the crush, the insignificance of who you choose as a life partner, how serious and unserious everything can be, I don't get stuck in my culture, in my body, in my time period, in the norms and narratives fed to me by internet culture or media portrayals of success. I'm able to authentically be me, even when I struggle to articulate who I am. In other words, spirituality is useful. imagining that we are all one or part of something bigger or indescribably existing somewhere beyond this while walking around this desolate plain, everything tastes a little better, looks a little prettier, sounds a little nicer, feels a little warmer, and has an aroma of joy when you embrace that there might be more. When love becomes like the air we breathe, redemption feels inevitable, and the best parts of every person feel stronger than their worst parts. I can navigate the day-to-day, not in blissful ignorance, but euphoric awareness. Spirituality helps me see more spectrums than binaries. It helps me be present. Or better yet, ignore the concept of time altogether, the limitations of space and time. Sometimes all that can get in the way of fantasy and pleasure, but also it can get in the way of comfort and safety if you're fixated on human limitations. I don't fear death. I hate when others die. But I talk to the loved ones I've lost. Whether I'm shouting at an empty sky or whispering to guardian angels, I feel a lot better hoping against the odds rather than feeling defeated by how unfair it is that people are temporary. I am also temporary, though. And whether I cease to exist or haunt my enemies or watch over my friends when I die, I don't fear my heart stopping. Living with my private spirituality means being in a flow state every time I speak. It means writing with the delusion of grandeur that my words deserve because they can change the world. I allow my flaws to not be sins or crimes, but opportunities for awareness, growth, and even a little spice. I don't desire perfection. I barely desire to be good. I desire to be me. And part of being me is being everyone else and no one else. And those paradoxical cliches end up feeling fun and functional, not obsessive or evangelical. I don't have creeds. I have fluid curiosity. I don't have church. I have sacred spaces full of good memories and funny stories. I don't have prayer. I have introspection. I don't have commandments. I have principles. And I don't have a savior. I have a support system. And I want to be clear, I could be an atheist and still have empathy, imagination, and greater purpose. But for me, I like being a little kooky. I also like that my views could change next week and I wouldn't be embarrassed. Because when you are recovering from a cult, there is one state of mind that helps more than anything. Not only in understanding the trauma of your past, but in keeping yourself from other cults and totalitarian mindsets. And that is open-mindedness. My spirituality keeps me open-minded, and that keeps me safe. As I said in the beginning, I hate talking about all this stuff because I am so cautious and aware that I do, whether I like it or not, have influence over others by merely having a microphone in front of my mouth. I also want to be sensitive to how tough this stuff can be after leaving a cult and deconstructing your Christian experience and beliefs. But I do want to reassure you that if you still crave or own or are curious about spirituality, not only is that okay, but it is safe. It is safe to be spiritual apart from a cult. And for those who have broken free from the clutches of cult manipulation, the journey back into exploring spirituality is daunting. The prospect of revisiting past traumas, grappling with diverse beliefs, and confronting lingering scars, it all can feel insurmountable. Yet our innate quest for meaning and connection, I believe, always exists. Healing begins with reclaiming your voice in a safe, non-judgmental space. Sharing your story allows you to make sense of the past. For many, this requires therapy, but also just good friends and a trusted support system. By articulating your experiences, you can rediscover some more inner resilience and strength. And your healing is yours alone. You get to heal yourself, not therapists, not spiritual leaders. They're not the authors or authority of your experience. And that means that you have the freedom to choose your path without external pressures. Now, a good therapist can help in establishing safe boundaries and distinguishing healthy spiritual exploration from triggers or manipulation. But I do recommend being fiercely independent and taking everything everyone says to you with the biggest grain of salt. Don't regurgitate, originate your own thoughts. And as you explore various beliefs, embrace the right to challenge, the right to question, and select what resonates with your inner compass. Healing is not about forgetting. It's about crafting a narrative that acknowledges the past while embracing the present aspirations and hoping for a happier future. Constructing a coherent narrative is the best way you can honor your journey. And spirituality isn't rigid, it evolves with your experiences and emotions. You can validate the complexity within yourself. You can allow your beliefs to shift as you grow. There is no singular correct path. Embrace the fluidity of who you are, experimenting freely to create something that is uniquely you. It doesn't have to be under a spiritual framework at all, but it is allowed to be. And it's really natural to seek meaning and connection post-cult. You don't have to suppress those desires and urges. Confusion and doubt are understandable responses to past manipulation. Normalize these feelings within you. Recognize your strength. Be proud of past triumphs and be proud for getting past certain failures. Congratulate yourself for your resilience in navigating life's challenges. Because recovery and spiritual exploration are personal. Trust your instincts as you navigate beliefs. Experiment, question, and choose. Because this is about your soul. And in this very convoluted realm of spiritual questing, the allure of belonging collides with those darker currents because cults masquerade as bearers of enlightenment. Cults offer not a route to spiritual freedom, but rather the complete opposite. But many cults lure seekers with promises of transcending life's mundane confines. They seduce you with shortcuts to enlightenment, with shortcuts to personal growth, or even a shortcut to divine connection. Yet beneath this rather obvious facade in retrospect lies a rather rigid regime of control because leaders, charismatic and claiming divine insight, wield absolute authority. They dictate not just spiritual practices, but personal lives. They will often make their followers sever ties and forbid any kind of dissent. Cults prey on our existential uncertainties. They promise solace in a community, but they demand total surrender. They want you to forfeit your autonomy and your identity and your spirituality. Genuine spiritual exploration yields to indoctrination in these groups. Rituals touted as paths to enlightenment become tools of manipulation. Individuality is quashed, critical thinking scorned, deviation punished. Spirituality, in a more ideal setting, would foster personal growth and introspection, but cults substitute those with fear and dependency. True enlightenment embraces freedom and inquiry, while cults offer a twisted detour where they call coercion spirituality. And navigating these spiritual waters, it's hard. It's an experiment in imagination, enriched by different diverse thoughts, where genuine liberation is found not only through personal growth, but even in rejecting the counterfeit promises of cults. Because all cults are dangerous to your spiritual health. I can't speak to how damaging they all will be, or exactly how much truth they might mix in with their lies, or whether an experience with a cult will ruin your life or help it. But I do know that of all cults, Christianity is a bad answer to the questions of spirituality. Central to Christianity is a hierarchical structure of authority. Pastors, perceived as conduits of divine will, wield significant control over their believers' lives. They prescribe moral codes, dictate spiritual practices, and enforce doctrinal adherence. They demand unquestioning obedience in exchange for this perceived spiritual fulfillment. Christianity capitalizes on existential vulnerabilities. It provides a framework for understanding life's complexities and offers solace in times of uncertainty. However, this framework requires that adherents forsake their individual autonomy and any critical thinking. And conversion is a cornerstone of Christianity. Believers are encouraged to abandon previous beliefs and embrace a singular worldview dictated by what they call scripture and who they deem as a religious authority. Those who resist or question will face ostracism and exclusion. They reinforce the community's control over the individual, not only on a belief level, but on a behavior level. And while Christianity professes that it teaches values such as love, forgiveness, and spiritual growth, it's simply untrue. Because true spirituality encourages freedom of thought, personal growth, genuine questioning, and recognizing those nuances is essential for individuals in navigating whether they want to have a faith journey at all. Any spiritual pursuit should be enriching rather than constraining when it comes to the human experience. But I'll say this much. Jesus is a compelling template. Whether he was a lunatic, a construct of powerful authorities, or whatever cynical interpretations us XVs kind of gravitate towards when it comes to Jesus, his legacy and legend and mythology does offer a satisfying narrative for millions. And I just think it's fair for us as humans to ask, why? I mean, don't get me wrong, Buddha, Allah, Yahweh, polytheism, ancient mythologies, and New Age woohoo also can offer satisfactory narrative for millions. If it really does satisfy an individual's want for more, I think these templates of spirituality can be wonderful. And if it doesn't cause harm to themselves or others, even better. But I do want to say one more hot take about my own spirituality in light of these more developed ones. You are not less valuable than Jesus. You're not less valuable than Jesus, nor am I. In a spiritual sense, I'm not even sure, objectively, if evil figures like Hitler or Trump have less spiritual worth, even if their spirit might be literally evil. But that type of radical belief about equality when it comes to spiritual worth does not mean that there aren't people who deserve a taste of pain based on how they dish it out. And many in the world do not deserve the abuse that they face repeatedly their whole life. It's not fair that the wicked sometimes prosper and the righteous often suffer. But we are all, to varying degrees, victims of our circumstances, victims of our bodies, and victims of our environment. But we are never defined by circumstances, bodies, or environments. The imagination, the mind, our spirituality, our beliefs, our worldviews, our existence is beyond butterfly effects. And the narratives we tell ourselves to get through each day are not all there is. We are more than what faces us. We are more than our worst parts, and likely more than our best parts. The transcendent feelings that span generations and the legends and the stories we tell, it all shows that life is indeed a special and precious thing. But there is no shortcut. There's no drug you can take. There's no creed you can confess, justice you can advance, sermon you can preach, art you can draw, or affirmation you can say that will fix everything wrong with your life or wrong with the world. You have to live this life. But you don't have to live it isolated, and you don't have to live it under anyone else's rules. You are free. It scares me how close I was to living my life chained to dogma. It scares me how I was 3 clicks away from being a sociopathic pastor, touting and believing that love and obedience were the same thing. In an alternate timeline, I am ruining lives and calling it spirituality. I was 3 to 5 to 10 decisions away from accepting that my depression was inevitable and lifelessly dragging my feet through every year, hoping for the sweet release of death, where I would be brainwashed into a worshiping fool at the feet of a god too angry about an apple to keep me from cutting myself in high school. All the while, I would be trying to make everyone as miserable as I was. And I would be calling it spirituality, and I would be calling it the only access to love. Instead, I am free. Not just free from the cultish clutch of Christianity, but from the very concept that I will find answers to life's deepest questions. I'm not worried that there is some sort of orderly spiritual life hack that will really just be escapism. And I don't think escapism is very effective for living your best life now. We have the whole world ahead of us, free to choose what that means, where to settle down, embracing chaos. Together, we can walk slowly and on different paths. The Garden of Eden never ended, and we are free to eat whatever we want. This is the final season of the Cult of Christianity, but this is not the last time I will be investigating religions and cults. If you'd like to continue to follow my work, go to jverner.com or follow my Substack at johnverner.substack.com. You can also continue to support my work by going to thecultofchristianity.com and subscribing for a giant backlog of bonus content and stay up to date when my next big project releases. Thank you for listening, subscribing, sharing, reviewing, and as always, keep love in your life, hope in your heart, and searching in your soul.